This week we are doing our fourth demonstration. We're looking at bivariate tables, so tables where you can put more than one variable in it. In a way, we've already been doing this by looking at different countries, but this week we are going to look in much greater detail within a country. And we're going to look at line graphs. We're going to do this by reproducing some of the tables from this week's reading in Engelhardt and Appel. We're going to look specifically at the data for Great Britain, and there is Great Britain because Northern Ireland are surveyed separately and do tend to show very different trends. So we are going to reproduce tables 1 and 2 in the video demonstration, and you will need to do the reproduction of one of the other tables in the quiz, which is why I advise you later on to keep your pivot tables and save them so that you can just adapt them when you're doing the quiz. The first thing that we need to do is to download the new dataset. So if you go into Moodle, I have started adding some country datasets. So in the data section, go down to the country datasets, and this week we are going to work with the Great Britain dataset. So you can go ahead and download that, and when you open it up, it should look like this. I have a few things to note about the differences between this dataset and the one that we've been working with in the last few weeks. So the last few weeks our dataset had the averaged information, or the combined agreement percentages for all of the different variables. This dataset has individual respondent information, and this is where pivot tables become very important. So this unified respondent number column, that's basically just the same as like a student ID or another random number that is assigned to someone as an identifier instead of using their name. We've got information about which wave of the survey the data came from, as well as the precise year of the survey, and we have information about which study this came from, because some of the data is from the World Values Survey and some of it is from the European Values Study. Some of the columns look blank, but that's just because there aren't values for all years and all answers. So if we scroll down, we can see that answers to this start to appear much later. So there are a lot of responses in here. You can see we've got lots of different waves, and we have a lot of different variables. And as I said, this is where you really need to be able to use pivot tables, because otherwise you've got something like 1200 variables and 7046 individual responses saved in here. The other things to note are that these numbers are from the Unified World Values, European Values Study codes. So you want to know more about the questionnaire and the participating countries, then on Moodle under the data section I've added a PDF about participating countries, and that will also give you some more information, what's called a code book, of the values that are given to different survey questions. If a variable has been deleted, that's because there were no responses for that country to that question. And as I said, I am working to provide more country datasets. So far I've finished 5 of them. They do each take a couple of hours to produce. So if there are particular priorities for you, then please do look at what countries are available and send me a request. The first thing we are going to do today is to reproduce the first table from the Engelhardt and Appel reading from this week. But we're just going to use the Great Britain data, so you will need to download the new dataset from the Moodle page. This dataset contains information going back to 1981. So we need to start off with inserting a pivot table. And you will probably want to do each of these pivot tables on a separate sheet this time so that you can keep them, because you will need to use a couple of them for your results in this week's quiz. So the first thing that we need to do to reproduce Inglehart and Appel's table is to put the post-materialism 4-item index into the rows. And that will be pretty much down at the bottom of your list of variables. So if you scroll all the way down, just go back slightly, and it's variable number Y002. So go ahead and drag that into rows. We do want to ignore things that say blank, so we're just going to tick that box. Then we want to put the importance of God variable into the columns and the values boxes. This one is F063, so if you look over here at the side of the variable labels, they've all got a letter followed by some numbers, and they are in roughly alphabetical order. So if you scroll up, you'll see that we can get to the section with the questions of F, and we just need to find F063, how important is God in your life? Now we want to put this both in the columns and then drag it again to put it into values. In the columns, again, click your drop down menu to get rid of don't know and blank responses, so that we're only looking at people who said from 1 to 10. Now in Inglehart and Appel's publication, they give the percentage who gave a rating of 1 to 4 on our scale of 1 to 10. So there are two things that we need to do here. We need to filter these so that we're looking at 1 to 4 as a single coherent group, and we need to change the way that these numbers appear so that they show up as percentages. What we're looking at the moment is the count. So in this box we've got 170 people who came up as materialist on the 4-item index and chose answer 1 on the 1 to 10 scale of how important is God in your life. We're going to start by turning this into percentages. So in your values section on the pivot table, go to value field settings. This time you need to go into show values as, and where it says no calculation, what we want is percentage of row total. And that's because we want it to be out of 100% amongst materialists, for example, so that reading across the row, all of the answers added together should equal 100%. That's also why we want to make sure that we've got the don't knows and blanks filtered out. And then press OK. You should see that your screen looks like this, where it switches. You've got a grand total showing up as 100% for every single row. The next thing we need to do is to group together our different variables. To group together the variables, we can select the values that we want to group and just click Group Selection. Then we can rename this. So let's just call this low. So this will correspond with the category that Inglehart and Appel used. And then we've got group 2, which is values 5 to 10. If this hasn't happened automatically, go ahead and press group selection again and change the name for group 2. Let's just call it higher, for example. Now what happens is when those are expanded, so when it looks like a minus symbol next to those two labels, we can see the individual values for each of those responses. But if we collapse them by clicking on that minus symbol, we'll see that it adds together all of the different response values. So 1 to 4 then comes up as being 38.64% of the materialist respondents. The final thing that we need to do to reproduce Engelhardt and Appel's data is to move the survey year into the filters, because we're currently looking at a variety of years and their data is from 1981. So we can go ahead and choose 1981, press OK. We should see that our values update here so that we have 32.28% materialist and of materialists who said that God was of low importance in their lives, compared to 50.64% of post-materialists. Now, how does this compare to what Engelhardt and Appel show us? Well, we can see that the perceived importance of God by value, type and country here, they have 31% gave a rating of 4 or below to the question about the importance of God, 31% for materialist, 41% for mixed, 49% for post-materialist, and 40% for total. And we can compare that to our Excel results, which are almost exactly the same, and the minor differences could be chalked up to their data being weighted, because I haven't applied the weighting on our survey data set. It could be calculation error, but it could also be because they cite having used a Gallup poll, so they might actually have a slightly different data set that they were calculating this from. I would recommend that you keep that pivot table as it is so that you can use it for the quiz questions, and that you create a new one for the next stage. As I mentioned, you might want to start with a new pivot table now to do the second exercise. You can do this by going to the Insert tab and inserting a pivot table. And this will start you out on a fresh sheet. So if you toggle back to your other sheet, you should still have your information there. And for example, we can collapse our group back down. Not really sure what happened to my label there. So that we've got low and higher. Okay, so over here, this time the table that we are going to be trying to reproduce is table 2 from Engelhardt and Appel, perceived importance of God by age group. So there are a few different things we're going to need to do here. We need to group together our responses to the question, how important is God in your life, again into one group of people responding 1 to 4 and another group for 5 to 10. We also need to combine our respondents into different age groups. So what we're going to do is to put our variable F063, again the question about the importance of God in the respondent's life, into both the columns and the values. So I'm going to put that columns and I'm going to put it into values. Then in the rows, what we want are the respondents' ages. This is going to be most of the way down. Should start with X003 is the variable number. In fact, most of the demographic variables, so age, sex, and so on, are towards the end of the list of variables in the dataset. Now we need to add our filters again, because Englehart's table starts at the age of 18, so we need to take out the 15, 16, and 17-year-olds here. In the row labels drop-down menu, I'm going to deselect 15, 16, 17, scroll all the way down, and make sure that you exclude the blank answers as well. And then go into your column labels, scroll down, and deselect don't know and blank. Just a reminder what we're looking at here. We have 18-year-olds reading across in row 5, and what we've got is 46 18-year-olds who chose 1 on the scale of 1 to 10 of how important God is in their life. But we still have several more things that we need to do before we can actually work with this data. So first of all, we need to group our selections together again. But you should actually have this already done from having done your other pivot table. For some reason, it is reordering my groups. So I've got group 1 and group 2, but it's showing one before the other. Okay, so group 1, again, need to rename this. So we've got low, and then we've got higher. We are going to collapse both of these, and then we need to group our age groups together. So 18 to 24 is going to be the first group, and you can see, because I've already done this myself, group 2 is 25 to 34, group 3 will be 35 to 44, group 4 is 45 to 54, group 5 is 55 to 64, and group 6 is 65 and up, which there's a 103-year-old respondent in this data set. Go ahead and group yours together, and then when you're done, you can add your labels so that you know who's in that group after you collapse it. So I've got 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65, let's press that button, 65 plus. I'm going to go ahead and collapse all of those. So this looks a lot tidier already. Now, I've got how important is God in your life, but I still need to add my year filter into here, because currently this is showing me all the survey years, and actually I want to look at 1981. And then I need to change what I'm showing so that I go to value field settings, show values as, and I want it to be percentage of row total, because I want to read across in rows and know what proportion of 18 to 24-year-olds selected 5 to 10 versus 1 to 4, and press OK. Now I can portray this graphically if I want, but I'm just going to do a quick visual check that I have a trend like I would expect. So I'd expect that younger people would be likely to say that God was less important in their lives, and I've got 56% of 18 to 24-year-olds who said that, compared to 20% of those aged 65 and older. If I compare this to Inglehart and Appel's findings, that is precisely the numbers that we get from them. So, well done us, we managed to reproduce it perfectly. But the next thing that I want to do is to turn this into a nice chart that shows me the trends over time. So, are people saying that God is less important now than in the past? To do this, we need to actually work with years, not as a filter, but so that we can see it across the board. So it's actually part of our table. We're going to put our year survey into the columns. And we want to filter out so that we're not looking at blank, don't know. We don't really want to look at higher. But our numbers here are now not very helpful, because our 100% is now measuring 100% over the whole time period, which doesn't do us much good. Instead, what we need to do is portray the 100% for each year at a time. The way to do this is to go into values, value field settings, show your values as, and we want to do percentage of parent title, and your parent in this case is going to be the variable that you want it to be a proportion of. So we want it to be a proportion within a year. So we're going to choose year survey. But because we filtered out our higher responses, we run into a bit of a problem there. Okay, so now we've got higher, lower, and that adds up to 100% within each of the years. So we've got 1981, and then we can scroll over all the way to 2009 results. Now, to graph this, we don't want to have this automatically updating, so we are going to copy this and paste values and number formatting, but we don't want to just straight up paste it so that it's still responding to anything that we might do on the main sheet or any changes that we make to the pivot table. I can take out this row that only says row labels, and I want to make sure that I've got the year above each one of the responses. And after I've done that, I can go ahead and just delete the columns for high and title for each of these, because we're just not interested in those in this particular case. All we want to know for our chart is the percentage of people who chose 1 to 4. What we're going to do is to get rid of all of these blank spaces by selecting the years. Now, don't go as far as selecting your age group, so stop at the column before that. Go to Sort and Filter, Custom Sort. In Options, choose left to right instead of your normal top to bottom, and select the row where your years are. So in my case, it's row 23. Okay, in Magic, I have managed to get rid of all those blank columns, and I'm just going to delete that label again there. Now I want to turn this into a chart. I have a couple of different options. So I could do a clustered bar chart like we talked about last week. And this shows me, for example, looking at each age group, what happens over time, and I can see that they all dip and then rise again in the final year of the survey data. But a better way to portray this would actually be to use a line chart. So we don't have to start over, we can just go to change chart type, go to line, press OK. Line charts are really good for showing trends over time. However, because of the way that my table is with the years in the columns and the age groups in the rows, it has put the age groups on the x-axis. That's not what I want. I want the years to be on the x-axis. So all I have to do is go to the switch row column and magic. This is now showing me trends within each age group over a almost 30-year time period. And what I can see is that in 2009, it follows the exact trend we would predict, that 18 to 24-year-olds found that God was the least important in their lives compared to the 65 plus age group. But interestingly, we can't see a clear trend of secularization, at least on this question, because whilst it dips towards 99, we then see an upsurge, and markedly since 2005, in people choosing the higher category for the importance of God. So whilst there are generational differences, all groups, including young people, have increased in the past few years, which we would explain using the economic scarcity caused by the Great Recession, the pinch in jobs, the general insecurity of existence, if we want to use Inglehart's explanation. So congratulations, you have worked with data over time, you have produced a nested table. So not only have you made a bivariate table, you've actually made a table with 3 variables portrayed in it, and you've learned how to group variables and how to do some different calculations for portraying them. And that is where we'll stop.